Welcome everyone to BC's Offbeat Bass Gear. I am BC and today I am joined by my lovely and talented sidekick Carl here. For those of you who don't know Carl, Carl is in charge of looking at all the comments and looking at all the emails the channel receives. And then he and I go through them and, figure out if there's anything we can sort of use in there. I really appreciate all the comments. I liked all the comments that came in along the lines of, please don't ever record another video. Please hack your hands off so you can never play bass again. And my personal favorite, even though Victor Wooten isn't dead, your playing makes him spin in his grave. Once we got through all of those, we actually did have a couple of really good suggestions. And one, which was a brilliant and brilliantly simple one that came in, was someone who watched the video I did a few weeks ago talking about guitar players wanting to play bass, asked, hey, can you do any sort of a side-by-side comparison on the different types of bass strings that are out there? What's the difference between flat wounds versus tape wounds versus round wounds? And I thought that was a brilliant idea, and I really thought that there was some value in that. I had to figure out how I was going to do it, so what I settled on was this. I have 3 P basses here. They are all essentially identical, all standard scale, all stock. And what I'm going to do is I have one strung with flat wounds, one strung with round wounds, and I have one strung with 3 strings that are a white silk wound and one that's a round wound to really hear a side-by-side comparison. And I'm going to take you through, we're going to do mainly fingerstyle playing because we'll talk about it a bit more. But the tape wounds or the flat wounds, they don't lend themselves that well to any sort of slapping and popping, although I'm sure there's, 20 million videos on YouTube of players flying around like Victor Wooten on flat wounds and tape wounds. Practically speaking, that's fairly difficult. So we're going to focus on fingerstyle playing, and we're going to focus on bass lines that I either know recorded with flat wounds or were recorded kind of in the flat wound era. So let's go ahead and dive into this. And the first thing we're going to lead off with is sort of the industry standard of bass strings, which is round wounds. And what I'm going to be playing through today is, this is a 40th anniversary Squier P bass. It has the widest, fattest P bass neck I have ever played. So if this is what you're looking for in a bass, I really encourage you to go for this. This thing is massive. And I have everything here set kind of 12 o'clock on the tone control. Everything is at 12 o'clock on my PV little combo here. So let's go through this. I'll take you through some real simple bass lines, most of which you should know. And then we'll move through flat wounds and tape wounds. So let's get to it. Okay, so round wound strings, they're the classic. They are the brainchild of the late great John Entwistle. He went to James House Strings, the manufacturer of Rotosounds. He didn't like the flat wounds that were available at the time, wanted something brighter sounding, something more percussive with kind of better attack and lower string tension. And Rotosound, after a while, found something that worked. And I think it's why Rotosound really was the industry standard for round wound bass strings for quite a long time, and they're still great strings today. And what you get with them is you have the lower string tension, a very bright, poppy, snappy tone. You do, as a downside, get kind of more string noise, more of the kind of fingers moving across the windings. And the windings can be pretty rough. That's a criticism. Some of my favorite bass strings actually were made by Labella. They're hard rock and steels, which were noted for being really kind of rough textured and hard on the fingers. I really liked them, to tell you the truth. I found they were very easy to play. You could really dig in with them. But like everything else, there are some downsides. By virtue of the fact that they do have that great brightness and they can be used for slap style, tapping, pretty much any sort of bass playing, any technique lends itself pretty well to round wounds. They are the standard. They have been for an awfully long time, and they're going to continue to be. So we've heard the round wounds. Let's move to the granddaddy of all bass strings, the flat wounds. And the flat wounds are the classic tone you hear on many early recordings of very prominent bass lines. James Jamerson's entire career was done with flat wound strings, and probably no more than 3 sets of strings his entire career. Never changed his strings. All the Beatles recordings were really done with flat wounds. I'll have to look, but I can't think if there are any that were not. A lot of players use them. Let's kind of listen to what we have here now versus what we had with the round wounds. I threw a couple bass lines in there that were recorded much later and were done with round wound strings to kind of compare, just to give you sort of a sense. If you listen, I think you'll pick up the fact that the flat wound strings are much thuddier, much thumpier, much more sort of mid-rangey. When you play them, the thing you'll notice is that they are at a higher string tension when tuned to pitch than round wound strings, and that can take some getting used to. For an awfully long time, I really hated playing flat wounds because I was hitting them with the same level of attack that I was round wounds, and I found myself kind of overcompensating for the fact that your fingers do tend to slide off the strings because they have a polished flat surface, hence the term flat wounds. Having said that, I think the knock on flat wounds is that you cannot get a very sharp, very bright attack from them. And I think to some extent that's true. But if you look at players like Steve Harris has played flat wounds his whole career. And there's a lot of grind and attack to his playing. Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy, he was a pick style player. But he had a great deal of kind of snap and attack in his bass playing as well. Some of that's EQing and otherwise, but I think that the flat wound string really does have a charm all its own. Once you get used to the fact you're dealing with the higher string tension, I think you can really move around on them pretty well. They're never going to be anybody's first choice for slapping or popping or tapping, but they do have their own kind of, audible charm and tone that they do very well. And like I said, I don't think you necessarily need to rule them out because the perception that they are very thumpy and thuddy, you can get some more grind and growl out of it. You're just not going to get the top end. And there are advantages. Although they do cost more than round wound strings, they last forever. I mean, the round wounds will develop dirt and corrosion and go dead. Flat wounds, because of that smooth surface, they really don't. and they really don't beat up fretboards to the extent that round wounds do. Just as a quick example, I have this fretless jazz bass here that I have flat wounds on just because this is a beautiful piece of ebony that I had made into a fretless neck from a fretted neck, and I don't want to mark it up. And for that, the flat wounds do a great job. A lot of players will use flat wounds on a fretless bass for that reason. So although they're kind of, old technology, they really do have a place. And I don't know too many bass players that don't have, if they've got a few basses, one of them kind of like that P bass, one that's set up for doing the old Motown stuff with flat wounds. You put a mute on it. Having said that, you really don't need to dedicate a bass for that flat wound tone. If you mute a P bass with round wound strings and you really dial back the tone, you can get pretty close. You can do some muting with your hands. One of the reasons I think bass players will talk about leaving their strings on for forever is to get that dead, thuddy sort of flat wound tone, but not have to deal with the higher string tension and adjusting their playability a little bit. So that takes us through round wounds, that takes us through flat wounds. So now we're going to talk about tape wounds. And I brought some visual aids here to show you what tape wounds look like, just to sort of illustrate the different kinds, because these are a little more rare. This is a low B tape wound. This is a white wound, a silk wound. I believe, let's see here, this is a set of the Labellas that I like it. They call them their gold white nylon tape wound. So these are gold whites, and they're kind of a yellow cream, but they are one type of tape wound. The more common type of tape wound is this type. It's got kind of a glossy tape winding over it, and they're available obviously in any kind of gauge. What happens is this: you're essentially starting out with a round wound string, and then over the top of that round wound string, extra layers of coating are put. This nylon winding is added to it. And the intent is to basically give you the advantages of a flat wound string without the disadvantages. I'm going to have to pop a cable here to do this, but I have here a bass. Once again, pretty standard P bass. And this one, I have 3 silk wounds on, the white silk wounds, and 1 round wound string. I'll take you through this. We'll be doing, like I said, mainly bass lines from the flat wound era, and I'll throw in a couple more modern ones that are pretty simple so you can hear everything. And let me know what you think. Okay, so for those who were curious or care, the D string on this is actually the round wound, and it blends pretty seamlessly, at least to my ears, with the silk wounds. So I think, if you want something that feels as close and sounds as close as you can to a round wound, but doesn't have sort of the grind and the coarseness of a round wound, the silk wounds are great. They don't have the higher tension of the flat wounds. There are some disadvantages. Silk wounds and tape wounds, they're expensive. There's no two ways about it. They really are expensive strings. And one disadvantage to them is that very often to get them to thread into a standard bass string post, you end up having to peel off some of the silk. So that's a little bit of a headache, but you can kind of plan for that when you do a string change. And the strings do last a really long time. Once the coating wears through in a couple of spots, you really do need to change the set. You know, it's not like flat wounds where you can leave them on forever. Once the coating wears through, it really becomes an issue, so you need to change them. I have had these on. I have a 5-string fretless bass that I love, and I have had these on there basically because I thought they were kind of the closest to a great hybrid blend. I go back and forth. I have these on there, and then I think they do lack that kind of classic Jocko Moi, that great growl he had on his fretless. So currently I actually have round wounds back on it. I know it's not the best thing for the fretboard, but the tone is pretty incomparable. So I think silk wounds and tape wounds are great. I think the silk wounds are a little bit better. They're also more expensive, but they're not quite a round wound. And because you're layering tape over an already established round wound string, the gauges are wider. They're heavier. So you may have issues with the nut. You may have to adjust the intonation. So there are disadvantages to it too. So I think you sort of need to know that going in. If you're a bass player, I really do encourage you, if you've got a few basses, just grab one that's set up well, but you don't play a lot, and try out different strings. Try some tape wounds, the whites, and the nylon, the black, the white, the flat wounds, and get a feel for what works for you. I think it can be another tool in your arsenal. I don't think you're ever going to replace round wound strings, any of them, or be near as popular, but they do have their own kind of unique tonal tendencies, and that's of real value, I think, if you're looking for something new, something different, or if you really want to capture those very old kind of Motown and early Beatles tones. They were all recorded with flat wounds. Now, having said that, like I said, I'm always going to love my round wounds. They're incredibly versatile. They've got a wonderful brightness and top end to them, and you can really, really dig in when you play them. I think that's all I really wanted to cover today. Carl and I thank you for being here. We want to thank you for staying until the bitter end. Please put in some comments below. Let me know what you thought of the video, what could be improved, what needs to be improved, and any ideas that you might have for other subjects going forward, and I'll try to do something with them. I appreciate all of you being here, and I want you to stay tuned and stay safe. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.